Welcome to Wholesale Change, the webcast and podcast from Distribution Strategy Group, where we provide thought leadership for wholesale change agents like you. If you're on this call, you're probably a wholesale change agent. My name is Ian Heller. I'm one of the co-hosts of this show, and I'd like to welcome in now my business partner, the ace of analytics, the doctor of distribution, Jonathan Bine, PhD. How are you doing today, Jonathan?
I'm freezing down here in Boulder. How's it up there in Longmont?
Well, we're 10 miles away, but it was like 56 last night. It's incredible
Yeah.
for the middle of July. Nice break from the heat. So today's topic is the golden rule of distributor marketing. A big promise, right? Can there be a golden rule for such a broad topic that includes everything from public relations to direct mail to advertising to SEO? I mean, marketing is one of those fields like history. So I have a history degree. So people will come up to me and they'll say, I've been reading this book on 19th century South American plumbing. Do you know anything about that? Yeah, actually, that's what my senior thesis was on. But marketing is kind of the same way, right? I mean, it's so broad. I mean, you can be a quant head and be a good marketer. You can be creative and be a good marketer. But it also means that it's hard to be great at the field because it's so broad, right? So the question is, can you have a golden rule in such a broad topic? And we think the answer is yes. So you ready to jump in, Jonathan?
Go for it.
Okay. So we're going to get right to it. I was inspired by an author named Raymond Chandler. So he invented the Philip Marlowe detective. And he wrote that the golden rule of writing a detective novel is, when in doubt, have a man come through a door with a gun in his hand, right? So if you want to pick up the pace in the story, that's what you do. And I was thinking, probably the golden rule of selling is, when in doubt, make a sales call or make many. And I've known some great salespeople, and a couple of them have told me, look, if you just make your calls every single day, start early and late, make your calls, then in most environments, you're going to make your plan. And I think, go ahead.
The link between those two, Ian, is the gun and the word target.
Target marketing, right?
Targeted marketing. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's right. Targeted marketing. It's what the NRA does. So anyway, so the golden rule of distributor marketing is, when in doubt, put relevant offers in front of targeted customers. So this is built on some assumptions that we're going to get into, but that's it. You have to tell customers what you have to sell, and you've got to, offer it to them, often at an attractive price, or at least even better when they actually need it, which you can sometimes determine from data. But there are a couple of assumptions behind this rule that we'd like to go through. First of all, one is, and our good friend Jim Tinzillo says this, you segment customers, but also customers segment you, right? So they have an opinion about the kind of supplier you are, what you do for them, what they get from you. And once that's your identity, it's hard to change, right? So there was a book years ago written by David Aker, who's a branding expert, and he would say, it's easy to get trapped in the brand graveyard. And the brand graveyard is when customers think they know what you do, and they're really not open to more information about you, right? So, hey, you're my power transmission supplier, or you're my safety supplier, or you're my tool supplier, and they don't really let you take on an expanded identity beyond that, or at least they're not trying to buy more from you because they've already categorized you in a way that's comfortable for them. So if you want to broaden that category, you're going to have to take the initiative to do it yourself. Is that fair, Jonathan?
Well, it's absolutely fair. And even smaller distributors typically have thousands, if not tens of thousands of SKUs.
Right.
So if you've got a good customer who's buying a narrow set of SKUs from you, it could be daily, a couple times a week, bi-weekly, monthly, whatever the period is, you literally have thousands of other SKUs and dozens, if not hundreds of other product categories you could be selling them.
And this really leads us to our first point, which is that customers don't know what you sell. And I think this is a paradigm that you have to kill inside your organization if you want to be a good distributor marketer. There's just the assumption that customers, they understand us a little bit. Maybe they understand us as half as well as we understand ourselves, but they really don't. They really hardly know your company at all. And the way I illustrate this to people, if you've been around a while, if you've ever done a distribution center or branch tour with a customer, so you're walking through the warehouse, you're showing them, your operations, and that customer points up on a shelf and says, huh, when did you guys start selling Honda generators? And you say, 1985. But they don't know. Even though they've done business with you dozens, hundreds, thousands of times, they're not aware of what you have to sell. And so that is one of the reasons that over the years, fast growing distributors have been aggressive marketers. I know it's hard to measure the impact of all of this in the short run, but when you do display merchandising and send out flyers and promotional emails, it's like creating transparency in the walls of your distribution center. And for the first time, customers can actually see what you sell. So this notion that my customers understand me is it's nefarious. You got to kill it. Second, customers don't think of you when they need something. So these are related, right? So if I don't know that you carry safety supplies and I have a need for safety products, you're not going to be on what, academics call the evoked list of suppliers, right? So, generally speaking, and this is, I think this is changing because of the rise of Amazon and some other providers, but generally speaking, when customers need something from you, they envision that item and then they envision where they're going to buy it. And, so what you want to do is when they think of that item, you want them to think of you. And you do that by talking about that product or showing them images of that product. And by the way, this is just part of understanding how the brain works. So if I say USB drive, you just pictured a USB drive. If I say, strawberry pie, you see a strawberry pie. If I see ball bearings, you see ball bearings. So you can't control it. When someone says the name of a product, then you picture that product in your mind, and then you're going to associate that with certain suppliers. And so if you don't have the images planted in people's heads that you sell those products, then you break the association. So they think of the need, but they aren't thinking of you as one of the places where they can fulfill that need, which is, and these images decay. So you constantly have to replenish these images in the minds of the customer, because they are not going to, think of you if you have not successfully associated that product with your brand. And these images decay over time. I think we have a bullet on there. Yeah, right. So marketing's responsibility is to craft and communicate the value proposition in a compelling way and communicate it over and over and over again, so that when a customer has a need, whether it's a product or service, they think of you. Is that reasonable, Jonathan?
Absolutely. And as long as we're going all psychological on this thing, on your prior point, when you say they don't think of you when they need something, so you show them ball bearings, they think of ball bearings. The beauty of that is that they will actually generalize to say, oh, it's not just that you carry this particular brand of ball bearings. They'll think of you as carrying ball bearings now, right?
Yes.
And so the association, to your point, in this third one, has to be rehearsed, reinforced continually for them to keep that connection strong. Otherwise, it will decay.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's what happens is that, over time, those images decay. And so you have to replace them, because guess what? There are competitors trying to put images of their products and brand in your customers' heads. And it's frustrating. And I've talked to countless distribution executives who are frustrated that their customers don't know what they sell. And sales reps too. It's like, well, why didn't you call me for that? Well, I didn't even know you carried that. That's because I segmented you. I pigeonholed you as my supplier of this kind of thing, not that kind of thing. And you have to build that association to be on the evoked supplier set.
Let's linger on this third point for just a second before we
Okay.
go to the outcomes. So when you talk about the value proposition, what do you mean when you say that? Because a lot of distributors think they have a clear value proposition.
I think you're probably better at explaining that than anyone. Why don't you tell me?
Oh gosh, you just turned the question around.
Well, I
I'm
can
on
take a
you.
crack at it if you want. I mean,
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
okay. All right. So, the, the whole nature of value add is how distributors or any other manufacturers or service companies take inputs and then turn them into something more valuable as outputs, right? So that's the nature of value. So I think a value proposition is the products and services in combination that you provide for a customer, and an effective value proposition that's differentiated, right? So you actually do something that's different, right? So, I mean, if you look at Southwest Airlines, you're going to get point-to-point air transportation. You're going to get standardized service. You're going to get, high degree of execution. You're typically going to get a decent price, although they're not the bargain they used to be, right? And you're going to fly in an airline that has an extraordinary safety record. So, in exchange, and I'm probably going to be on time, right? So that is differentiated in the airline industry, which is why Southwest seems to suffer through these economic malaises better than anybody else does. But it's that combination of, in exchange for a implied amount of payment to you, I'm going to get back a set of products and or services that satisfy a need that I have.
Right, and currently a lot of distributor value propositions, at least as manifest in their website and collateral, look very similar to one another.
Yes.
So in your statement about marketing must craft, I mean, it means you got to do something that looks different than what the other 499,999 distributors in the U.S. are doing, right?
And you've probably looked at more distributor websites than anybody, but I'm probably not too far behind you. What are the things that you see that distributors claim over and over again that really are table stakes, not impressive differentiators?
From looking at sites as well as just asking people to describe their value proposition, the things that we see over and over again are assortment, which is assortment and selection, which is kind of the topic here. We also see claims about product availability, speed of delivery, and customer service, customer service is actually a little bit of a vague claim. But literally, I mean, this is the definition of Me Too. If 80 to 90% of your competitors are claiming the same things you're doing, then it's the definition of Me Too.
Yeah, right. And it's not, it's not differentiated, and, there's not that much hard to find stuff anymore because it's so fast to get just about anything from all kinds of different sources. So it's really not differentiated. But I think that actually reinforces the golden rule. It's like, there's more competition to be on the consideration set. So you have to work harder to associate products and services with your brand because there are so many new players trying to do the same thing.
You got to cut through the noise.
Right. All right. So let's talk about golden rule outcomes. So, this is just a reality of my experience. And I guess it's really logical, but I don't think it occurs to a lot of marketers. The more frequently you send relevant messages to targeted customers, or relevant offers, even better, the more frequently they'll buy from you. So there's this correlation. If I'm more frequently communicating with my customers, the more frequently they'll buy from me. And, there's a lot of concern about oversaturating customers, but we're going to get into that in a minute. But just one bullet point that I have, I was running marketing for a company that did direct marketing. This wasn't, that long ago where direct marketing was still effective. And we kept increasing the pages in our monthly flyer, and it just added to sales. We kept thinking, okay, at some point you're going to have so many pages that the customer's not going to flip through it. We never got to that point. Now, I'm sure it's out there, but we didn't reach it. And the reality is, I think it's about relevance, right? So for example, I love photography and I love motorcycles. So when I get sent something about one of those two subjects, I look at it, even if it's poorly executed or if it takes some effort for me to consume it. But if you send me marketing about children's clothing, I'm not going to look at it at all. It could be the world's finest piece on children's clothing or the world's most compelling email. And it's not going to work for me because I don't have little kids anymore. I don't have any grandkids. And so, if the relevance is good, if you really understand customers and you're sending them things that they have a high probability of being interested in, it's really hard to saturate them because they have an interest in what you're sending them.
Yeah, and that's actually an interesting point. I think there's a reluctance on the part of a lot of distributors, and again, we'll talk more about this in a couple slides, but there's a reluctance to bother the customer. If I'm sending stuff, I must be bothering them. Right. And that reluctance comes from our personal lives, where there's three things we don't like. We don't like getting phone calls after 5 o'clock, especially as we get into political season, because we're almost guaranteed to be fundraising. We don't like getting junk mail, filling up the landfills. Maybe it's going to recycling, and we don't like getting spam. But what we're going to see is that you're customers want to hear from you more than you know, and that's a really important aspect in this golden rule of marketing.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day that um, distributors talk about having relationships with their customers, and they really do. And that's different than in retail. I mean, I go to Target pretty regularly, but I don't feel like I have a relationship with Target.
Completely.
Um, Now there's stuff, now if I'm really passionate about something, or if it's important to my work, then I do develop relationships with those suppliers, right? So there, you know, I do a lot of public speaking and I do a lot of consulting. And so people who are in that world that interact with me, I develop, their business relationships, although sometimes they become friendships, but I'm open to that. And I expect that that's going to be a deeper and more robust relationship than with a retailer.
Well,
And
but here's where you do have a relationship with a retailer. If it's a
okay,
niche kind of thing. So
correct.
if there is a motorcycle store that sells the parts you want,
There is.
they may know you by name, you may have a relationship. If you're an audiophile
Right.
and there's like a really high-end audio store in town, you may have a relationship with the people at that store. But Target, not so much, right?
Yeah, but I think in your professional life, when you find a supplier that really helps you succeed, and they
Mhm.
take they fix problems for you, then and then especially if you start interacting with them personally, which you can't do with the pure online marketplace, but with the local distributor, you make phone calls to them, and they call you, and the account manager stops by, and they become an important part of your success. And you know those people you don't mind hearing from. You
That's
just
right.
expect that you're going to have more regular communication from them because it's targeted and it's specific and it's value added. Now, if that company starts sending you stuff that's nothing to do with your relationship, hey, we started a different division, there's nothing to do with you, and they keep pinging you, you might get annoyed. But for the most part, you're going to have a lot of tolerance for that, for communication from that supplier. Okay, and then this is the reality is that having more frequent communication with customers is an important part of customer lifecycle, right?
Absolutely.
So if you're sending out a lot of communications to customers, particularly if it's reasonably targeted, you're going to get more first-time buyers. You're going to get better retention, which means you'll have fewer customers leave you. And in all, you're going to improve your customer lifetime value. And in the long run, that correlates to financial success.
Absolutely, on the customer lifetime value thing, you can pull simple metrics from your own data to see what the customer retention correlation is to the number of categories bought, right? The more categories they buy from you, the sticky you are in the relationship with them. The more categories they buy, the longer you retain them, the higher the customer lifetime value. I think there's another piece in here that's really important, though. I've described where we are, kind of in the industry, as it pertains to product data, is that we are at data 1.0,
Hmm.
and data 1.0 means a much larger number of distributors have a reasonable set of product data, which 5 years ago was not true. The initiatives from affiliated distributors, IMARC associations, et cetera, to aggregate data, to make it better, to make it lower cost, have resulted in a much larger swath of distributors having a decent set of data. But now that we're at data 1.0, one of the things that's really key is to these golden rule outcomes. How do you get targeted messaging? How do you go beyond just spray and pray, right? So when I say spray and pray, I mean sending one email to your entire list. How do you get to a place where you can actually segment that either by, well, not either, but both by the customer persona. Is it procurement? Is it operations? Is it executive? As well as by industry segment, however you're choosing to do those industry segments. So if you think about, let's just say 3 or 4 different personas that you might be selling to, and then perhaps 3 or 4 different segments, then you've got somewhere between 10 and 15 more detailed segments within your list that you should be sending more tailored messages to. And I think as we go, beyond data 1.0, where a lot of distributors have e-commerce site, a lot of them have email, they're making transition from print to digital. It's really time to live what Ian is saying here about the targeted customers. You have to go beyond the one size fits all, get to the persona, get to the segment level, get something that's more relevant at a minimum.
Yeah, and I would do it for all customers, because I have worked with distributors and they say, well, we don't, we pull our account managed covered accounts, so our sales rep covered accounts off of our marketing list. And they've got various reasons for that. One of them is, well, they get better pricing, so we don't want to send them promotional materials that actually show higher prices. And I got to tell you, what I've seen, I've seen this so many times that I think it's just, in my mind anyway, it's proven you should mail them anyway or email them anyway, because they know if they generally get a better price. And so, if they see, something that's on sale, then they know to call their account managers to make sure they can't get a better price. They're not going to be offended, but it matters when they hear from you. And, whether it's a direct marketing piece, which I know is going out of fashion, but there's still markets where that works, or it's SEO or retargeting or whatever, regular communication is just essential, because or else people forget about you and they forget about what they sell, about what you sell. And so I think it's essential. You've got to keep the communication up, and it doesn't matter if it's your largest national account or if it's the smallest account who started buying yesterday.
Well, and I think to your point, in the national accounts, there may be customers or there may be contacts in that account who
Right.
are not being touched by field sales, right? They're at a remote location. They may not even know the field salesperson. So I think there's all kinds of reasons to do exactly as you're saying.
That's a great point. In fact, I was about to think of
I
that.
knew you were. Yeah.
So we have a comment from somebody here. Let's see here. It says technology allows you to put customer specific pricing in your email marketing. So this comes from Jason Capshaw, who's our producer today. And one of the most knowledgeable digital marketers probably in the world, certainly in my universe. And he says, technology allows you to put customer specific pricing in your email marketing as well. And that's a good point. So you can actually, segment your email marketing and vary the pricing based on the customer that you're emailing to. And so that's not something you could do easily in direct marketing, but it's certainly, common in online marketing of all kinds, really.
Back in the old days, they would have called that variable printing.
Right. That's true. Right. Right. Okay, let's see here. All right, you ready to go to the next page? This one's yours.
Let's go for it, man.
All right. So tell them the article this comes out of. There's a link for it on here. Oh, wait, we're going to do channels first. Sorry.
We'll do channels first. Yeah.
Good. I'm just going to put them all up there, Jonathan. Is that all right? All right.
Terrific.
All right. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when Ian and I were discussing the topic for today, we realized that a lot of the ideas around the golden rule of marketing are derived from the days of direct marketing, when you did things outbound, when you pushed things to your customer, flyers, catalogs. Today, as we know, for most sectors, there are still places where flyers and catalogs are generating plenty of revenue, but for most sectors, they're in transition towards digital. Email is another form of outbound. And so what we used to call direct marketing is now just email. And there's different forms of measurement. You're not using phone numbers as a way to measure, the effectiveness of the catalog. You're using an email marketing or a marketing automation thing. Same thing with the retargeting. That's outbound. So part of what we were talking about on previously was the importance of getting targeted content through this outbound mechanism. The inbound is a little bit different. It's not as obvious an application of the golden rule, but it does apply nonetheless, meaning that you need to get relevant content through your inbound channels. So you need to be choosing SEM keywords through AdWords or whatever you're using for paid search that are relevant. Your local inventory ads need to be relevant. All of this that you're sending out or that you're doing through an inbound mechanism is relevant to the customer. When it comes to SEO, you have to be selective and thoughtful about what you're doing. I looked at a company yesterday. It's a sub $100 million distributor. They have 390,000 keywords in SEO.
Wow.
And I mean, that's serious. I mean, that company probably grew out of the, catalog house, 25 years ago, they were probably a catalog house, and now they're strong in the digital and SEO. For most mid-sized distributors, or small, let's say 25 million to a billion, you're not going to have the budget to go out and create 400,000 keywords that show up in the search engines. And so you have to be selective and thoughtful about where you want to put your emphasis on that. But that can drive great results, and is especially, we'll talk about this more in another episode. We'll talk more about what's happening as a result of COVID. But no surprise, search is way up during COVID, and there's significant data to show that it's not just a minor change. Ian, you want to talk about the last in-person stuff? In the channels?
Yeah. So I think, it's the reality is that if the notion is that you're trying to put offers in front of customers, that can be something as formal as an email promotion, but it's actually any way that you show your product, because remember, the idea is to associate certain products in customers' minds with you, so that when they have the need, they think of you. So they don't know if you sell the product, or worse, the category, they're not going to come see you. And that's why things like branch displays are so important, because even if you're not selling a ton off your branch displays, you're educating the customer, and they will remember, hey, I was in that branch and I saw that they had, rigid plumbing tools. So I'm going to go back and I need a rigid plumbing tool. At least you're on the consideration set. Now, there are other things you have to do. You have to price it right. You have to provide good service. You have to have it in stock, but you're not even in the running if they don't know you carry it. And so that's the notion behind branch displays. Open houses, same thing. You want, I told the story of how you walk through a branch or a distribution center, and the customer sees all kinds of stuff that you've sold forever, and they're asking you when you started selling it. That's a really common thing that you see with customers, is that they don't know what you sell. And so with open houses, when you have all your suppliers out there and they're showing the latest and greatest, and the customers are walking through your warehouse, even if, obviously you want to make every event profitable if you can, but even if you don't make that one profitable in the short term, there's a good chance you're associating a lot of products in customers' minds with your brand that are new to them. Trade shows, same thing. I mean, look, I got very strong opinions about trade shows, because I think 95% of trade show exhibitors leave a lot of opportunity on the table. And there are ways to make trade shows, I think, measurably profitable in many cases, not every case, in many cases. And, at the very least, you can maximize your presence there. But, I believe in just piling in products and brands and merchandise in your booth so that people can see what you sell at the trade show. At Counter and Will Call, you can have suggested selling. Hey, you bought the Sawzall. Do you need the Sawzall blade? And then same thing with customer service. When someone comes in to place an order, I mean, when you buy online and they say customers who bought this also bought that, that's a service to the customer. I mean, if they walk out without everything they need to do the job, you're not being nice or doing a good job or helping the customer. You're hurting them. So we got a couple of questions in here, Jonathan. One is, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm actually glad, Derek, that you brought this. How do you typically measure the return on marketing investment? Is there a target goal? Let's both cover this. I want to just chime in on the outbound stuff. So we've done flyer programs as recently as the last couple or 3 years that have seen great results. And what happens with flyers, and this ties back to this whole golden rule idea, and what was your term for the brand, were the death of the brand, or what did you
brand graveyard?
Brand graveyard. What happens with all of this content is you're expanding the customer's concept of who you are. their mental map of who you are is growing. It started out here, but based on the campaign, the shape of that thing, what it covers is growing. So what we recommend is not measuring only whether they purchased this SKU that was in this flyer or email or catalog, but really measuring the customer that's receiving this content versus the customers who are not receiving this content. Because a lot of times what happens is you'll see that the customers who are receiving the content are buying a lot more, even if they're not buying the SKUs or the products or the items that were in that particular promotional item. And that's really counterintuitive. But the net effect of this is to keep you top of mind in that customer's mental image of you, so that when they need to buy something, like, oh yeah, I remember ABC or XYZ distributor, and even though you're doing product marketing, essentially, you are strengthening the brand with each impression that you create via email, flyer, catalog, retargeting, etc. So I think it's important to measure the customer, and this means having a test group, that's the one you're trying to sell to, versus a control group. In this particular example that I mentioned where we did flyers in the last couple or 3 years, we saw a 15% lift in the test group relative to the control group. And it was exactly that type of a campaign where we were trying to expand the customer's concept of what this distributor sold. The particular thing was they wanted to move more into safety and PPE. They'd been selling gas and welding for years, and it succeeded just wildly.
Yeah, I think that's really a critical point, Jonathan. I mean, if you send a customer a power tool promotion and they see a 1/2-inch DeWalt drill or 3/8 DeWalt drill, and they go, oh, I need a DeWalt drill, and they come in and buy a different model. Maybe they buy a cordless model that was different than when you advertised, or maybe they said, oh, there's a tool sale, but I'm really a Bosch person, and so they buy a Bosch tool. I mean, that piece still performed. And if all you do is measure the SKUs that are actually in the piece and you don't create this holdout group like you're talking about, you're going to undercount. And so really the SKU sales in the promotion are sort of the worst case scenario for your sales. And what if they come in addition to the drill, they buy 2 extra batteries and some accessories? Well, if you're not counting that stuff because it wasn't on the promotion, you're undercounting the promotion itself. And I think, if you can do holdout groups, it's far and away the best way to go.
What I've seen though is, sometimes we'll do a flyer and we'll really be clear to the customer, hey, you have to measure with the holdout group, and they'll get focused on the SKU and they'll conclude that the flyer's not working, or they'll conclude that email's not working.
Yeah, so, I tell you, and it's hard enough. I mean, the problem with getting a marketing budget is it's always competing with the alternative of not spending the money, right? So if I want $10,000 for a marketing promotion, the CFO's thinking of it in terms of, well, if I don't spend the money, that's $10,000 in EBIT for sure, in net income, right? If I do spend the money, then I'm going to need to get, whatever, $20,000, $30,000 in sales to get the $10,000 back. So it's always, marketing is always competing with the perfectly legitimate alternative of not spending the money. And the first person I ever heard say that was Don Belinsky, who was this genius guy I worked for at Grainger a long time ago. And he's absolutely right. So you have to have some compelling data. So, don't agree to a measurement methodology that knocks away 80% of the potential value. At least, get people to consider some of that, all of it if you can, because otherwise the standard that you have to hit to make the marketing look like it's got positive ROI is so steep you'll never get there.
Absolutely.
Second question is from Lindsay. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of embracing your niche and reflecting that in your marketing channel strategy? Just like what you said about the importance of targeting, marketing, relevance in emails, et cetera, from an SEO/search perspective in particular, that also matters. The more niche you are, the better you can compete in search results for what you do best. And I think that's right. The famous marketing professor, Phil Kotler, is the person at least I know of, who coined the term riches and niches. And, I think it's very tempting to want to sell everything to everybody. And sure enough, I get it. You want to have a broad line, but you need to be known for something. I mean, if I say Volvo, people know it's synonymous with safety. Whether or not they make the safest cars, at least they differentiate on something, right? Toyota's about reliability, and And I think, having a niche, so at least you're known for something and you can build on it later, but at least be known for something. It also means that you can invest in SEO because you're not competing for really, really broad terms, that a lot of distributors are buying SEO for, and retailers. You're competing for more niche items.
I think there's a couple aspects that I would add in the response to Lindsay. Great question, Lindsay. The first is on the niche. One of the ways you can claim product selection, you can't claim that you're gonna compete on product selection against Ferguson or against Grainger or against Amazon or Motion. Pick your 800-pound gorilla. But if you have a niche, perhaps a brand, perhaps a few product categories where you are really dominant, then you can compete against Ferguson or perhaps Grainger on that particular niche. The second thing I would say about the niche goes back to what you're trying to do with SEO. We've written an article called the SEO Arms Race, which basically says, hey, look, the biggest players are piling on SEO keywords day by day, week by week, and they're essentially growing at 80 or 100% a year. So once again, you're not going to compete with the 800-pound gorilla who's got a staff or perhaps an agency that's doing all this SEO. But you can pick the areas where you want to focus, and you need to do this in particular if you've gotten data from like an affiliated distributors or iMark, because the problem with you having that data is that 100 other people have the same data, right? If you're an electrical distributor and you got the iMark data, you got 100 other distributors that have the same data. What is Google going to do? It's going to throw its hands up if it sees the same data in terms of who to put first. So selecting either the niche or the core set of SKUs that you want to focus on is a way to really stand out above the crowd and to compete thoughtfully for those who have lesser budgets than the 800-pound gorillas. That was kind of long-winded. Sorry, Ian.
No, that's right. I agree. All right, let's talk about communication frequency. And this comes from a paper that you guys published. Were you the author of this, Jonathan?
Debbie Paul and I were the author.
Debbie Paul. Okay, got it. So a couple people, Jonathan and Debbie Paul, who's an expert on our team. So why don't you walk through sort of what you learned generally from this, and then give us some examples.
Yeah, so this goes back to the point I was making before. Your customers want to hear from you more than you know. And you don't need to be timid, particularly if you're giving them relevant content. So these communication types are shown there on the left. And what we did, and this is derived from thousands of end customers across different industries. So this is a kind of broad average. Things may vary in your customer base. But we looked at where things kind of centered on what would be the right frequency or what's known as cadence of communication. So for email, it's weekly to monthly. And actually, since this article was written, it's probably shifting more to weekly and even maybe more than once per week. We also looked at some of the in-person preferences, sales rep. I noticed Brent Grover is on our call today, and he's quoted this research from us. 37% of the end customers either never want a sales rep visit or want one only once a year, which is basically never. But that also varied widely by customer base. So there was one customer base where they were absolutely attached to seeing their sales rep. Like 90% of the respondents there wanted to see a sales rep at least once a month. There are others where they really didn't want to see a sales rep very much at all. If you're looking at some kind of thing related to new products, monthly to quarterly is the right cadence. If you go more frequently than monthly, you're probably sending too much, and if you're going less frequently than quarterly, it's probably insufficient. Ian, why don't you talk about what you've seen in catalogs and mini catalogs, because you have recent really great results in doing that, even though you ultimately decided to move towards digital.
Yeah, well, the place I used to run marketing is still doing these monthly flyers, and I think it's they're still, they wouldn't do it if they weren't making money at it. And I think specialty or mini catalog, that's the product flyer. I'm at, look, it depends who you're marketing to, but there are segments within distribution that still have people who prefer paper, and they tend to look more like you and me than our kids. Jonathan, I mean, my kids think a catalog makes a great doorstop, but there are people who still like going through them. And I think, I wouldn't rush to abandon any channel. I mean, if they're still working for you, then by all means, you should use them. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
So I saw that Brent actually raised his hand. I'm not sure. I think I can allow him to talk. So I'm going to see if I can bring him in here for a second. If not, we'll go back to the chart. So hang on a minute. Brent, are you there?
Brent's on mute.
Oh yeah, Brent, I think you're muted on your end. There you are.
Brent? It looks good. Just can't hear him.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll keep going. And Brent, let us know if you can figure out how to talk. We'd love to hear what you have to say. But I think the days of print marketing are winding down. But it's hard enough to find profitable ways of growing customers in marketing. So by all means, if print is still working for you, don't stop. Don't stop because you feel like it's old fashioned. Stop when it stops when you no longer can generate a positive ROI from it.
I think the only other one in here that we haven't discussed is the phone call, which could pertain to some type of telemarketing or proactive inside sales.
Yep.
And our view of this is that your customers are looking for more efficient ways to interact with you. I mean, that's what we've seen even leading up to COVID. We've seen it during COVID, right, where there's this radical ramp in digital activity. They're looking for more efficient ways to interact with you. So sort of as a counter to the sales rep visit, the proactive inside sales visit, call, or the telemarketing call is often a more efficient way for them to interact with you. Instead of 30 to 45, maybe 60-minute visit, they're able to get something done in 5 to 10 minutes. The good news is that what's good for the goose is good for the gander, meaning that it's efficient for your customers and it's also efficient for you if you're able to offer this type of a channel to them.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to go back to the sales rep thing for a minute because, I love making sales calls, but I got to tell you that most sales reps do too much selling and not enough listening, in my experience. And I think that's why people don't want to see them as often. And, some people just have that gift for, empathy and listening and evaluating needs. I mean, as you know, I've got a son who's a cop, right? And he called me this morning because he had an overnight shift. And, they were someplace with a woman who was borderline, because she was a suicide risk. And he told me this morning, he said, what I found in those situations, Dad, is the less I talk and the more I let that person talk, the quicker they calm down. And, she wouldn't let the cops in her house, but he got her to let the paramedics in the house, and they, took her to the hospital. And, I think just that ability to ask questions and get people to open up, whether it's something extreme, like, being in law enforcement in a life and death situation, or it's just selling, for heaven's sake, stop, ask questions. Because we're so eager to describe the incredible things we can do for people that we aren't evaluating their needs or listening to them and letting them get their their point of view out. I know, like, for example, if I'm presenting to a group and there's contention in the room, the first thing I do is I say, okay, before I start, I'd like to know what you guys want to hear about. And people, I want to know about this and that. Why'd you guys do that program or whatever it is? I write it all down on a flip chart, and that tells everyone in the room, we're going to get to your issue. And it gets them away from, sitting on their hands, anxious to talk, and it puts them in a listening mode. And I see, it's such a simple thing, but I see salespeople violate it all the time, and it's why their customers don't want to see them, right? I mean, you want to make the offer, but you got to get the relevance right. And to get the relevance right, you've got to understand the need.
So what you're saying is you think a lot of sales reps they're not hard of hearing, they're hard of listening.
Yeah, right. And there's some great salespeople out there, so I'm not trying to generalize, but it's a bell curve, right? And what I've seen is the ones who are extraordinary are very, very good listeners, and the ones who are not are, sort of overwhelming the customer. Well, they're either not working very hard, or they work for a company that just is not competitive, or in many cases, they're not listening. Okay. So I think we're ready to move on. We're almost done here. Anything else on this page you wanted to go over?
I think we're good.
Okay. So I wanted to tell you that Jonathan and I are doing a project for the National Association of Wholesaler Distributors. It's the coming storm of converging technologies. That's research report 1. It's part of a series that we're doing called How Technology Will Transform Wholesale Distribution. These reports are free. It's not available for download yet, but it will be on naw.org/publications. I believe that's where it's going to be. We'll share the real link when we get it. And then we've just completed some research among distributors to get their perspectives on technology. This is going to be a series of research reports and also webinars. So look for that coming from naw.org soon. It'll be in Smart Brief, and they'll be marketing it separately. But we'd love to have you on those calls as well. We'll really go into deep dives about everything from additive manufacturing, i.e. 3D printing, to a particular focus on artificial intelligence. We're going to talk about marketplaces. We're asking distributors, their suppliers, and their customers how they see new capabilities emerging from technology, how they're going to respond to them, how important they are to them. So it's really going to be, we believe, the definitive series on the technological transformation of wholesale distribution. And that will be out here in a few days. With information about an upcoming webinar here soon. Anything you want to add to that, Jonathan?
First of all, I think it's a tremendous set of topics that we're going to be covering, and should be of broad interest to the smart listeners that we've got with us today. So.
Great. If you have questions, here's our contact information. We love hearing from you. We know we're not always right, and so we love to, just like we argue with each other sometimes, we like to argue with other people. It's done with respect and it's done professionally, but none of us is as smart as all of us. And so we'd love to get your input about everything that we present here. And please visit us on distributionstrategy.com. You can sign up for our regular emails. And I want to thank you for joining us today for Wholesale Change, the weekly webcast and podcast from Distribution Strategy Group, where we provide thought leadership for wholesale change agents like you. Thank you.